The foster parents arrived 30 minutes later, the early evening sun casting long shadows across the driveway. In their arms was a 6-year-old girl, crying in absolute agony. She was small, fragile, and trembling, her backpack clutched tightly against her chest. The foster parents approached Paul, who had come to the door, and handed him the girl's file. "Good luck," they said, turning and walking down the driveway to their car. Without another word, they drove off. Paul took the girl into his arms and carried her gently into the house, feeling the weight of her tiny body and the palpable fear emanating from her. Behind him, Mark, who had been standing quietly in the hallway, took the backpack from the girl. Paul carried the girl into the bedroom he had prepared for her, the one with the pink quilt and soft furnishings. Mark carried the backpack, and Eli followed curiously, watching as the girl curled up on the bed. "Why are you crying?" Eli asked softly. The girl lifted her arm and leg slightly. "It hurts," she said, showing the bruises on her ribs. They weren't just bruises, they were broken. Paul took a closer look and discovered 4 broken ribs, a broken right arm, and a jaw that appeared misaligned. His heart tightened. Paul made 2 calls, first to the paramedics, the second to Sally, explaining the situation in urgent clipped sentences. Within 10 minutes, Sally arrived, driving with the paramedics in tow. One look at the girl, and they shook their heads. "We can't take her by road. She needs a helicopter," one said. Sally's face paled. "No one told me about the abuse," she said incredulously. Attempts to secure an air ambulance proved impossible. They were tied up elsewhere. Thinking fast, Sally contacted her brother Andy, a member of a notorious motorcycle club, explaining the situation. Within minutes, he replied, "We're coming. One of our brothers has a helicopter and is already on his way." Paul stayed with the girl, watching as the paramedics prepared her for the flight. The journey to Somewhere General Hospital was short, barely 2 minutes, but every second felt too long. During the flight, Paul studied her file. Her name was Nevaeh. She had no siblings, no extended family nearby, just a lonely, beaten child. Once at the hospital, she was rushed to the ER. Dr. Smith, the pediatric trauma specialist, was already waiting for them. X-rays, CAT scans, and urgent assessments began immediately. Paul paced the hallway, worrying, while Sally and the bikers watched, their leather jackets stark against the sterile white walls of the hospital. "How is she?" Andy asked when Paul came around the corner. "Still waiting," Paul replied, voice tight with concern. The ER doors suddenly banged open. A large doctor in a white coat stormed out, pointing a shaking finger at Paul. "Who does this to a child?" he yelled. Sally and Andy stepped forward immediately. "Not him. He brought her in," they protested. The doctor relaxed slightly, taking a deep breath. "She's worse than it looks," he said. "There's internal bruising, swelling on the spine, swelling on the brain. A broken arm, broken femur, and 4 broken ribs." "Will she be okay?" Paul asked, voice low. "We'll have to induce a coma for a week, possibly 2, to help with the swelling and to keep her still," Dr. Smith said grimly, who stepped out from behind the large doctor. The following week was tense. The children were allowed to visit after school, each taking turns bringing soft toys, books to read to her, or drawings to keep her company. Eli and Mark sat quietly beside her, talking softly. When she stirred, David, quieter than usual, held her hand once or twice, whispering encouragements only she could hear. Paul and Sally coordinated constantly with the doctors, ensuring Nevaeh's care was meticulous and uninterrupted. Gradually, the coma was eased. When Nevaeh finally opened her eyes, the first faces she saw were 4 familiar ones: Paul, Eli, Mark, and David, all staring at her in quiet anticipation. Her jaw had been wired shut, so she could not speak properly yet, but her eyes held recognition and trust. The transition home to the Nowhere house was slow. Nevaeh remained in a wheelchair and would spend several more weeks in bed, resting and healing. But then, one question hung in the air, unspoken. "Is my sister here too?" Nevaeh looked around her pink room, eyes wide. Paul knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, we've looked at your file. There's no record of you having any biological siblings." "I know," she said, voice barely audible through her jaw. "But I remember her from Mommy's tummy. We came out together." Abigail, one of the biker's sisters who was an off-duty nurse who'd helped her in the helicopter, exchanged a glance with Paul. We'll have to look a bit deeper, she said gently. Paul and the boys were simply glad to have Nevaeh home. Later, Abigail pulled out her phone and sent another message to the bikers group, asking the brothers to see what they could find out about a sister related to Nevaeh. She'd given them all the info she had. 2 towns over, in a town called Everywhere, Mary Ann, a social worker, sat in her office looking at the file of a 6-year-old girl named Emily. She had been adopted at birth, and her parents were considering returning her because she kept asking about a sister they knew did not exist. The records showed her as an only child, but Mary Ann felt uneasy because the girl had insisted she had a sister. Weeks later, she discussed the case with colleagues at the office. They mentioned a similar case being tracked by the notorious motorcycle club in Nowhere. Mary Ann contacted Sally and Abigail, sending a photo of Emily. When she received an email from Sally, she looked at the photo, and then out of her window, there was a little girl sitting on a bench outside in the sunshine. She gasped. "No way. They're identical," she whispered, taking a photo of Emily and sending it back to Sally. Over the next few hours, the hospital records department with Abigail's insistence found and confirmed their birth records. Their biological mother had indeed requested they be separated at birth for reasons she did not give. A quiet plan was devised to bring Emily to the house that afternoon while Nevaeh was sleeping. Emily had been told she was going to a new foster placement. "Is that where my sister is?" she asked Mary Ann. "Sweetie, we don't know of any sister for you," Mary Ann replied. Emily frowned. "I know, but I'll keep looking. One day, yes, one day we'll be together again." The boys only learned of the plan when Mary Ann's car pulled into the driveway. They were shocked when Emily appeared in the living room. They thought it was Nevaeh. Nevaeh was still asleep in her room, unaware of the events happening downstairs. Paul guided Emily gently up the stairs, asking, "Would you like to see your room? It's kind of pink and the bed's a little lumpy." "Yes," Emily replied, voice tired. "It's been a long day, and I don't mind lumpy for now." Paul guided her further along the hallway, Eli recording quietly on his phone. When they entered the room, Emily didn't immediately see Nevaeh sleeping on the other bed. As she scanned the room a moment later, her eyes caught the lump in the other bed, a little girl, and she let out a giggle in excitement. Paul whispered with his finger over his lips, "Wake her up gently." Emily stammered, "Is she?" "Yes," Paul said softly. "We found both of you." Emily shook Nevaeh gently, as if she were the most fragile thing ever. Nevaeh woke, groggy-eyed from the medication. While wiping sleep from her eyes, she saw Emily standing there with a grin on her face and let out the same giggle. They dived into a hug, simultaneously and unending, and Paul thought it might last forever. A new relationship began here, with Paul and Mary and standing in the doorway, Eli recording, watching two souls once separated for what was meant to be forever now joined together again. The twins, once unhappy and alone, were now precious, joyous, and playful, their personalities shining through despite everything they had endured. The next morning, the air at breakfast felt different. The children, Eli, Mark, David, Nevaeh, and Emily, talked quietly about being a family forever. Paul and Mary exchanged glances, hearts full. Eli insisted on pizza that evening. It had become his tradition. Sally arrived later that morning with the official adoption paperwork. Over the next month or two, the adoption hearing processes were expedited and completed, making the 5 children officially part of the family. Life settled into a new rhythm: school, meals, play, counseling sessions, and of course the joy of a permanent family. Then, just as the house began to feel comfortably full, Paul's phone rang. It was Mary Ann. "There's another child, a girl," she said. "Tonight. No emergency placement, but Paul, she's in the hospital." And with that, the house settled. Not quite full, maybe never,